argues that the concept of future generations should not be limited to Homo sapiens as currently defined. The ethical consequences of human actions on extraterrestrial biological entities presents us with a fascinating opportunity for thought experimentation. Now that there is proof of water ice on Mercury, Mars, our moon, comets, and elsewhere, and liquid water oceans beneath the ice of Europa, the chances for discovery of present or pre-existing extraterrestrial life in our system and in our galaxy are no longer remote, and discovery may happen very soon. It is critical, therefore, that we address the ethical issues that will rapidly evolve from such a discovery prior to that event. And this is probably key to this whole paper, for from the moment of discovery forward, there will be immense political, commercial, and perhaps even theological pressures that may steer us from an ethical policy. This is not an original idea of mine. NASA, SETI, and others are very aware of this need and have initiated discussions on these issues. Next. Thank you. I am defining what may be discovered as biological entities as opposed to using terms such as extraterrestrial life or organism. First, the term biological entities is more inclusive and broader in scope, in that they have yet to be discovered. Existing definitions of life and organisms written specifically for Earth and solely as a result of observation of Earth's life may be challenged. Second, science is constantly tinkering with our definition of what constitutes life. We are finding life in places and at environmental extremes we believed impossible for life to exist here on Earth, such as hot springs with temperatures to 131 centigrade or 267 Fahrenheit, a mile deep in African mines, in acidic and alkaline environments, and under kilometer-thick Antarctic ice. Next. Third, I'm including evidence of extinct and dormant forms, their possible products, ecosystems, and landscapes with biological components, and possibly even evolving chemical processes. Lastly, and perhaps most importantly, I'm purposefully avoiding terms like organisms. Such terms begin a process of comparison to Earth's organisms, which can be misleading or prejudicial. While true that what may be discovered could closely resemble Earth's life, we cannot afford to make that assumption prior to discovery. We must be open to the amazing novelty of what we find and resist the temptation to make the judgmental statement, such as, it's just a bacterium. That comparative approach serves only to diminish its own status in its own world and distort our ethical considerations of its existence. Slide. This paper will first define the opportunity of discovery and then describe why it is unique. Slide. Next, I will discuss how a new ethical and philosophical approach to our relationship with these extraterrestrial biological entities might be forged. Next. Third, I will propose that if we can structure a new ethical relationship with extraterrestrial forms, we can apply those improved standards to all life back here on Earth as well. And as the title of this paper infers, next, by crafting a higher ethical standard towards all life, we can better frame our obligations to future generations with the knowledge that they may be very different than the present-day biological species of humans that fill this room today. The philosophies of bioethics have been constrained by various limiting factors, including relative worth, cultural significance, and taxonomic status. Next. First, utility. Oh, we're way ahead. That's okay. That's fine. The degree of ethical consideration afforded non-human life is influenced by how useful the organism is to humans, how much it is valued. For example, in the West, we generally apply a higher ethical standard to horses than rats. There are laws hundreds of years old protecting horses from cruelty, but until very recently, little was said of the ethical standards directed at the protection of rodents. And the laws and practices we do have serve primarily to caution that we use and kill them with a minimum of pain and trauma when they are in our employ, such as in scientific experimentation. Wild rats are generally not addressed as an ethical concern, but wild horses often are. Next. Cultural significance. No extraterrestrial entity, with a few exceptions, plays a significant role in human culture. None are eaten, none are used in religious ceremonies, none are actively hunted for sport or entertainment, except in Hollywood productions. The exceptions would be, and it was very tempting to throw a slide in there, the exceptions would be the cultural significance of extraterrestrial bodies, such as the moon and the sun, in spiritual, religious, or artistic contexts. Next. And third, our taxonomic classification systems are largely based on degrees of evolutionary relatedness, and that's very useful in understanding the diversity of Earth's organisms. But taxonomic status is a human construction, and until recently, most taxonomic treatments placed humans at the topmost so-called branch of the tree. On Earth, especially in the West, higher ethical standards are generally applied to organisms, quote-unquote, higher up that evolutionary tree. We grant greater ethical status to a bird than we do to a snake or clam, and certainly there is very little consideration for microbial scale life, and generally none for plants, unless they have cultural significance, such as revered trees. Next. The opportunity we now have is that extraterrestrial biological entities fall outside of these ethical constraints at present. We haven't discovered them, so they are not used. They have no utility, and therefore no utilitarian value or worth. We share no history with them. They are neither heroes nor villains in our cultures, so the place within the context of culture has not been established. And they have no taxonomic status and have not therefore fallen into a possibly prejudicial preconception of place or ranking. They are free in that they are unknown. However, the moment that extraterrestrial biological entities are discovered, next, opportunities to craft policies that foster enlightened relationships less biased by utilitarian and exploitive motives will be diminished. Next. Compounding this immediacy, human extraterrestrial relationships established at our first encounter have the power of precedent. After discovery, it will become increasingly difficult to alter these relationships as special interests become entrenched, bureaucracies calcified to match Earth-oriented protocols, procedures grow routine, and opportunities to critique motives diminish. For example, imagine the immense commercial pressure to reduce ethical consideration to an entity discovered at a prime mining site as opposed to one found in a less valuable location or without immediate economic potential. Next. We certainly encounter the same here on Earth. And then 2 more slides. Thank you. Should we expect it to be different on Mars or elsewhere without critical forethought? We must therefore resolve our policies regarding extraterrestrial ethics prior to their discovery, prior to our knowledge of whether or not they exist, prior to learning of their potential commercial value. We have a singular moment to craft policies that will be fair, just, and ethical, for once they're discovered, they will be rapidly relegated to terrestrial ranks and biases, and an opportunity for creative and liberating new approaches to human relationship with the greater biological universe will be lost. Next. How then might we, how then might our exploration of another world, such as Mars, provide an opportunity to craft a new relationship with non-human biological entities? How might this work in that we don't even know if they exist? One of the most difficult aspects of applying an ethical standard to non-humans is that there is only very limited dialogue between species, and certainly none at a philosophical level that I'm aware of. Humans do the analysis and derive ethical standards focused through the lens of human perception. Other species have little say. This makes it extremely difficult for humans to not be anthropocentric and biased, and to not depend on the relative utility of other species. How then might we develop a just bioethical standard that would apply to biological entities that have no voice, much less those that haven't been discovered? Next. A prominent guiding theory, and this was referenced just a few minutes ago, was provided by Harvard moral and political philosophy professor John Rawls, who just died, I think, about 6 or 7 years ago, in the context of fairness among humans, and his work was specific to humans. How can you be fair, and by extension, how can you be ethical? And he devised a thought experiment, a hypothetical situation he calls the original position. Next. In briefest terms, the best way to have two children divide a cookie between them fairly is to have one cut and the other choose. Anybody that has two kids knows this. If the party doing the cutting, or those who define and distribute ethical standards, does not know which piece he will ultimately receive, it is likely they will define those standards as fairly as possible. That becomes a foundation for justice and aids in the balance between morality and law, fairness, and by extension, ethical social institutions. Rawls asks that we consider that we place a hypothetical group of humans, next, in something like a jury deliberation room and ask them to draft a set of principles of justice for the basic structure of a society. The Constitution they produce would function to design and guide a society in a just and fair manner. That's not a new concept. It was attempted in part in Philadelphia in the 18th century with some practical success. However, Rawls adds some rather serious caveats that are very novel. But this hypothetical group inhabits this original position behind what he calls a veil of ignorance. The participants who are drafting these ethical standards are, next, unaware of their present or future personal status within the society, and they don't know their personal abilities, next, psychological state, physical stature, race, culture, beliefs, gender, or other factors that would bias them in their self-interest and detract from the equal application of justice. But they are fully aware of the conditions of the world, societies, and governments. They are, as Rawls states, they are unformed but fully sapient, yet have no concept of their individual future condition. Their product would not be a cookie very evenly divided, but a set of rules and criteria for ensuring that the cookie is divided evenly and that laws would be just and fair for all humans. Because of this veil of ignorance, they would be free of favoritism or other personal or group biases and would therefore strive to ensure that their list is just and fair. Rawls limited membership of the group in the original position, next, to humans. But what if the group were expanded? And here I'm departing from Rawls. So this is where Rawls sort of left us with this hypothetical. And so what I'm speculating here is, what if the group were expanded to, next, say include whales, and that none of the members of that group knew whether in their future life they would be human or whale? How might the rules governing ethics and fairness change in response? What I'm proposing today is a thought experiment, and this is strictly a thought experiment. What if the group in the original position was expanded to include not only humans, but representatives of extraterrestrial biological entities? Next. And the task given the group was to draft a constitution that would establish fair and ethical standards and practices regarding space colonization and exploitation. This, of course, is highly hypothetical, and I'm not proposing that the group be assembled any more than Rawls was proposing that his group of unformed yet fully sapient humans be convened. But I believe the unique perspective provided by not knowing whether you would live your life as a human or a Martian microbe would generate some innovative and very interesting discussions and results. Would the result be to guarantee the continued existence of every individual microbe and that they would not be disturbed or killed? I don't think so. More likely, there may be stipulations that all be allowed to exist as species and allowed to continue to evolve. I'm not making any conclusions here, just opening the discussion for consideration of new ways to address these biological and bioethical issues. In a more practical sense, how might Martian entities be represented in any such dialogue? One option already used in different contexts, next, is to provide them guardian ad litem representation. Such representation is widely applied to those for those who have no voice, such as those with severe mental handicaps, someone in a coma, or infants. Humans are appointed to speak for them and could just as well stand in for Martian life and represent their interests. Next. Lastly, how might the discovery of an extraterrestrial biological entity affect our obligations to future